Why do women stay in abusive relationships? That's been the $64 million question that everyone has asked for a long, long time. Or why do men stay in abusive relationships for that matter? Because they can be abused too. Why does anyone stay in a relationship where they're being hurt? You know, that question is a really complicated one. And what irritates me about it is, firstly, it is victim blaming. It's basically saying, well, if only they just got up and left, then they'd be fine. You know, it's got nothing to do with the abuse. It's the onus is on the victim for just walking and leaving. And if they don't, well, then they're to blame. They can only blame themselves. They deserve the abuse in some way. Well, that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. I know it's a question that people would wonder if they've never been through it. But I've been through it, and it's not as simple as that. You know, when I met my ex, who almost killed me, I didn't fall in love with a violent man. I fell in love with a man who later turned out to be violent. And there is a huge difference in that. I didn't know when I met this charismatic, gorgeous man who was funny, who was a great storyteller, who swept me off my feet, that he was going to become abusive. I didn't know that there were these invisible forces that were sucking me into what was going to become a destructive relationship that I risked my life in. But they are there, and I had no power to control them or to fight them. Because abusive people target their victims like an animal would do prey. They target us, they hone in on those of us. It might be subliminal to them as well, but this is what they do. They hone in on those of us who they can detect have a lack of self-esteem and a low sense of self-worth. Someone who's more likely to put other people above themselves, and they've got a lot of empathy, so they're going to put others' needs and well-being first and not their own. And that person, the abusive person, detects is someone who is ripe for manipulation. And that was somebody like me. So once you're in that relationship, they then start to test your boundaries, whether you've got strong, healthy boundaries and can say no, or whether they can start to push those boundaries down. You know, you might have a wonderful relationship for a while, and it might be, really exciting and intense and intoxicating for a while. Then suddenly you'll get this glimmer that there's a darker side, and it'll be so fleeting that you'll think, oh, did I imagine that? What just happened? When you get a flash of their anger or their bad behavior. But as soon as they've done it, it's gone. So you're left thinking, oh, what did I do? What have I done to cause that? So you start to change your behavior, thinking, well, it must have been something I did. And if it is, then I better change my behavior so I don't see that flash of anger again. So what you've just done is you've been tested by them. And instead of walking away and thinking, well, that behavior is unacceptable for me, I don't like that, or saying no, you've excused it away and you've thought, well, it's me, I've caused that, and you're changing your behavior. So you are accepting the blame for their behavior. And that's what they are going to test us for. They test very early on, is this someone who will accept the blame for my behavior and accept the blame for anything that goes wrong in our relationship? Once they've established that and that they know that you have somebody that has so much empathy, you will put their needs above yours, even if they're starting to hurt you, then they will now groom you. And I don't use that word lightly. You've been targeted, set up, and now you are going to be groomed by that abusive person or narcissist in the same way that a paedophile grooms its victim, their victim. And that is by extremely manipulative tactics, such as gaslighting, which is where when you go to question their bad behavior, they just say to you, well, you're exaggerating things. That never happened. You're imagining it, or you're too sensitive. Anything but accept the responsibility for their behavior. Again, putting that blame onto you. They'll be mirroring onto you, telling you that you're the one doing the things that they're actually doing. For example, you're the liar when it's them who is doing the lying. Or they'll set these unwritten rules that you have to live up to. And just when you think you've worked those rules out, they'll shift the goalposts and keep them moving. So you are left on the back foot, second guessing all the time, what on earth is he going to set rules for next? And how do I live up to them so he doesn't or she doesn't get angry? They'll isolate you from your safety net or family and friends who can tell you that this is abusive, and validate you that you are good enough and deserve better. So they use all of these manipulative tactics to keep you off guard, make you sort of walk on eggshells and be unsure, and take the blame for them. But also to instill some fear into you so that you know that even when they're being nice to you, you understand the repercussions of when you are not keeping them happy. So you fear them in a little way and you keep changing your behavior. If I do X, then they'll be happy. If I do Y, then maybe the relationship will be okay and everything will be all right again. So you have now shouldered all the burden of that relationship onto you. And that's exactly what a narcissist needs and wants you to do. Because narcissists have an inflated sense of entitlement and an inflated sense of ego. It's all about them and their needs and nobody else's. And if they start to fear they lose control over you, because that's what they need to feed that self-inflated sense of ego, they need to have total control over you. But if they start to fear they're losing that control, then they will go into a narcissistic rage, and that's where the abuse will be absolutely severe. And this is when they can be at their most dangerous, when they fear they're losing you. And it's why 75% of murders or injuries happen when someone, usually a woman, is leaving a violent relationship. So they go into this narcissistic rage. Or if they fear that you're going to walk away from them, they'll start things like smear campaigns to make sure everybody else out there knows that you're the crazy one, not them. They are in fact the victim, not you. Or they'll bring others into the equation, which is called triangulation, like their mother or the hint of a new lover, to make you feel insecure that maybe you are the one to blame. It isn't them, and you're the one who's ruined this relationship. So blaming a victim is wrong, and asking that question, well, why don't they just leave? Why do women or men stay in these abusive relationships? In my opinion, is wrong. Because when you are in that really abusive cycle of manipulation, and not to mention by now you are developing an unhealthy addiction for them, because they show you the nice side, then you get the abuse. Then they show you the nice side, then you get the abuse. You're in this desperate search, this futile search for that nice, loving side again. And so you crave it like a drug. And the screwy thing is, the only person who can make you feel good about yourself again is the same person who is abusing you, hurting you, and putting you down. So your self-esteem becomes so whittled away that it's virtually non-existent. So put all that manipulation with a lack of self-esteem, and by now you are believing you deserve that abuse. It's really, you have no control anymore. It's impossible to leave. It is very, very hard. Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the hardest things I've ever done in my entire life. So I know that you cannot blame a victim for not just walking away. There's a man called Don Hennessy who's done 25 years of research on domestic violence and abusive relationships. And he's examined narcissists and, really explains that they control their victim. They set them up, target them, and groom them like a pedophile does. And if you continue to believe that you are to blame for that narcissist's behavior, if you continue to accept all the responsibility for what goes wrong in your relationship, well then you are going to continue down that cycle of abuse, and you'll actually end up risking losing your life. Don Hennessy has never met a violent man in 25 years of his research who has wanted to change and accepted they need to change. Remember, you're dealing with somebody narcissist who believes everybody else in the world is at fault and to blame, anyone but them. So when you have somebody like that, they're not going to suddenly turn around and say, oh yes, it was me, I need to change. So I would urge you to just look at this not as victim blaming. We do stay because we are groomed and manipulated into doing so. And take that knowledge as power and use it to understand that you need to stop accepting the blame. You are not to blame for being groomed, targeted, and groomed. You are not to be blamed for having a low sense of self-esteem and a low sense of self-worth. And you need to understand that this relationship is not about love, but control. That's not a healthy relationship. That is not one that will sustain long-term in a way that will give you a sense of well-being, happiness, and unconditional love. So I hope that makes sense. It is a very complicated answer to a very simple question. Why do we stay in abusive relationships? Well, the simple answer is because they detect in us that inner void of shame that we don't believe we're good enough. They hone in on us, they set us up, they groom us. So you are not to blame.